All right, good afternoon, happy Halloween, and welcome to today's webinar about Local Government Software as a Service, or SaaS. And it is brought to you today by ELGL and Viewpoint Cloud. I'm ELGL Executive Director Kirsten Wyatt, and it is my pleasure to moderate today's presentation. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network, and we engage the brightest minds in local government. One of the ways we do this is to provide exceptional and free online training about local government innovations. This webinar is free for ELGL members, and if you've logged on and you're not yet a member, please join us. You can sign up at elgl.org/membership. Memberships are $30 a person and enable us to provide awesome content like today's session. We'll also save a recording of today's webinar in the ELGL webinar library, located in the members-only section of elgl.org. Today, we're really excited to introduce ELGL to Tim Smith, the Fire Marshal in Orange, Connecticut. Tim is going to talk to us about how his town got sassy and what your organization can learn from his experiences. Before we begin, I want to let you know that your microphones and conference phones are muted, and this makes the webinar enjoyable and efficient for everyone. After the presentation has finished, or while Tim is presenting, we will open up for your questions, and these may be submitted using the chat box on the left side of your screen. I will ask these questions as they come in, so the recording of the webinar also includes the questions to our guests. Today's webinar is part of ELGL's Jam of the Month series, where we take our formidable content, online, and social media outreach on a deep dive into a particular topic area. And this month, we're exploring the concepts related to software as a service, and our friends at Viewpoint Cloud are leading the way in sharing topics and thought leadership on how your local government organization can move to cloud-based technology. Today, Tim will share his perspective on these topics, and you can follow along in the month of November for blog posts and a podcast on SaaS as well. We'll also be live tweeting today's webinar, and you can follow along with the hashtag ELGLJam, and please be sure to use the Twitter handles for today's topic from our host, Viewpoint Cloud. But before we get started on our deep dive into SaaS, I have two lightning round questions for Tim. So the first one is, who is your celebrity lookalike?
Wow, that's a tough question to answer in anyone's book, I would think. I'd like to say on a good day, maybe Burt Reynolds, God rest his soul. On a bad day, probably Chewbacca.
Those are two answers I've never heard, and we've been asking that question for a long time. So thank you for your honesty. And my second lightning round question is, what was the very best Halloween costume that you've ever had?
I was probably 10 years old when my parents got a new refrigerator. So I recycled the cardboard box that it came in and created a robot costume. And it had vinyl dryer vents for arms and had a little door to open up to deposit candy. It had blinking lights, and it was an incredible costume. The problem was it was so clumsy, I couldn't keep up with the other kids running up and down the street, and I was the only kid that could climb a set of stairs and knock on a door because nobody else had room.
That is a very memorable costume indeed. And hopefully, maybe after the webinar, you can dig up some pictures and share it with our attendees.
Maybe.
All right, so with that, we are going to begin our webinar, and we're going to start with a Q&A with you. So first things first, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and also about Orange, Connecticut?
Well, I've been in the fire service for about 38 years now, and 30 of that have been as the fire marshal for the town of Orange. Orange is primarily started off as a farming community here in southern Connecticut. We're nestled between the city of New Haven and the city of Bridgeport and Milford. Yale University is grown into our community with campuses, and we've been very, we provide support as suburban housing and business for these various universities. University of New Haven, Sikorsky Aircraft is a neighbor, so we house and we have a lot of businesses that support that industry. And in my 30 years of doing this, the town has grown immensely, especially along the Route 1 corridor. We have a very progressive and a very dense commercial population. of retail, business. Southern end of town has a lot of industry. And anyone that's ever eaten a Pez candy, it came from here, from Orange, Connecticut. Pez is the only North American manufacturer of Pez candies. So that's housed here in Orange.
That is a very perfect fact for Halloween, given that there probably will be a lot of candy consumed this evening.
And we have a lot of dentist office as well.
So tell us more about SaaS, or software as a service. Obviously, being an early adopter, this is something that you care deeply about, but how do you explain it to somebody who just has no idea what that term means, or what it means for local government?
Historically, when people consider working with local government, or if someone has to go to a town or a city hall to get something done, let's say a resident, they typically will dread that because there's historically a lot of dysfunction in local government. A lot of departments are disconnected, they operate themselves, they have their own policies and procedures. So it's frustrating for the end user, in this case the resident or the business person, to make things happen. And when you get involved with a SaaS sort of a system or setup, it just helps the flow of information. It helps the responsibility be disseminated amongst the various departments that should be involved. For example, a permit, a building permit, where you'll have a building department involved, the fire department, zoning, inland wetlands. All those departments have to work together on issuing permits. And without any sort of a system in place, historically a paper-based system, it's very difficult. Somebody has to walk around with a piece of paper, look for signatures and approvals, wait for those people to be available in their offices, and it was very dysfunctional. Have always been very technology driven in my department, where our inspections have been online and recorded in a database since the early 90s. That's the only way, in my opinion, you can really manage the day-to-day operations of a fire marshal's office. This spills over and holds true for any municipal office. With SAS, we have the ability now to tie all these offices together, and the end user, the resident or the business or the contractor in this case, has the ability to go online and not even have to come down to these various offices that are spread out through a town and look for those signatures. So it really has streamlined the operation, not only for us internally, but for the end user on the outside.
Can you share with us the specific challenges that Orange was facing you've talked a little bit about the practicality of software as a service, but talk to us about your specific challenges that you were facing when you were looking for some new software, and what some of your end goals or your big picture goals were that you had in mind as you started down this path.
Well, typically, it's hard to get anything moving forward in any sort of municipal operation without the approval of the administrative head. In our case, it's a board of selectmen or first selectman. Other cities may have mayors or they have aldermen. You have to get the buy-in for these people to realize this is a problem that needs to be addressed. Once you can do that, then they leave it up to you to find a solution to the problem. And with us, the buy-in here in Orange wasn't bad. Our first selectman was very receptive to implementing a new program. He liked the idea of making the system available to people online after hours, so they don't have to go down to the various town buildings. So he was very supportive in the beginning. The difficulty we had was with a lot of the different departments, because change does not come easy for anyone. And when you're talking municipal government, this is the way we've been doing it for all these years. Why should we change now? And you have to get these people to understand that the system is broken and it can be improved. So for the first 6 months to a year, we really had to get the buy-in of the other departments that were going to participate. They eventually all came on board, but we had to have a lot of FaceTime. We had to do a lot of end user meetings up at the town hall with all the various departments. And as we implemented the system, the buy-in was much better. And then you finally hear from different departments saying, we should have done this years ago.
So when you wrote those initial RFPs, or when you were putting together the overview of what you wanted most out of a software platform. How did you describe that? And how did you describe the partnership that you were seeking with a technology company?
Well, that's easy. The first thing we wanted to do was we did not want to take on any more responsibility as far as supporting technology infrastructure than we already had. So right off the bat, I was looking for something that was going to be cloud-based and hosted outside of our municipality, where program can be updated, maintained, reliable and safe, easily restorable backups are being done. So those were some of the strong conditions we had when we started seeking out a vendor for our system. And we viewed lots of them. Then, of course, cost is going to be the next one. What's going to be the return for our investment, which is going to be a selling point for our finance board and, again, our first selectman. So we looked at a lot of systems that were very expansive, very expensive, far more than what we really needed for our town, which is about 14,000 people. We ended up settling with Viewpoint after several meetings and demonstrations. Myself and the building department, we felt that it was a very good fit. So we pulled the trigger, and that's how we settled on it.
Can you share with us the experiences with implementation and with adoption? Obviously, anytime you try something new, there's always going to be some people who are first in line and excited, and other people who grumble and moan about it. What were your experiences, especially moving toward something that was maybe different than the town had ever experienced before?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was about a 60-40 split. 40% were in favor of it in the beginning. The other 60% came kicking and screaming initially. What we did in my department first, and working with our technology department and our finance office, we really took on the task of rolling out and implementing all the templates, creating all the forms that we needed to do, all of the workflows that were required, setting up all the fee structure. We did that in-house here in the fire marshal's office first. And in doing that, we learned the system ourselves because we knew nothing about the program here in our office. So we had a lot of interaction with Viewpoint. They were very supportive, a lot of one-on-one, a lot of phone conversations, several meetings before we even had our first end user meeting with the contractor for training of the rest of the departments. So we had to have a really good understanding. With that, I would say we invested probably about 2 months worth of time in addition to our other duties to really ramp up and get it ready and get ourselves into a position where we're comfortable to answer questions and address problems that other departments may have and get them up and running. Once we did that in the very beginning for the first year or so, we would have a meeting once a month of all the Viewpoint users. And we would discuss upcoming steps in implementing it, what needed to be done, who was having issues, who needed help. And we stayed on top of it. And between myself and my deputy, we became very involved in helping them set up those forms and templates. We showed them how to run the program and how to go get the help from support. And then we let them loose and they started doing it on their own. Once we did that, the other departments saw how simple it really was, that they saw that it wasn't as scary as they initially thought, and they started to buy into it. A lot of the most difficult part we had was the volumes of forms, paper forms that every department used. None of them really tied together with any other department. So we had to make a change, and we basically went back to every department and said, look at all your forms, examine them, do away with what you don't need. If something doesn't need to be physically signed, then we don't need to have it involved in the workflows or the system. So we really filtered out a lot of that old paperwork and then started from there and building all the templates and building the forms from there for the system. And it really streamlined all the operations much better.
Well, and this is more of a comment than a question, but it really speaks to the experience of, and how you choose a technology partner, that they brought with them this perspective on here's how you onboard, or here's how you bring that 60% along and get them excited. And so it sounds like you did everything right to change that balance in terms of, who's in favor or who's skeptical. And it sounds like you did everything right.
Well, we did, but I mean, we started our first dealings with Carl Anderson, Carl was phenomenal in getting us set up and running. Then we dealt with support, Seth, and a lot of different, staff on their end. They were very helpful to us. So they packed our chute. All we had to do was jump and have the faith in their packing abilities.
I think that might be the quote of the webinar. Hopefully Judy and Rachel and Carl are taking note, because I think that's one of the best compliments that you can give when you're starting something new with a new partner. So back to this overall concept of SaaS. How does it fit your needs, or how does it continue to fit your needs better than a traditional platform?
In our case, it's really streamlined our operation quite a bit. We're having far better communications amongst town departments in the permit process for any sort of residential or commercial development. We've taken out involvement where we don't need to be, as in the old system where we would get involved with things that we really didn't need to be involved in. So it's helped us on that aspect. We're really streamlined our operation. One of the big things that we see, or two big things I'll say, is first, is the amount of contact time where we have people physically coming into our station for sign-offs or to apply for permits, where it really, nothing against them. They have a mission, they have a goal, they have a project in mind they need to accomplish, and they're the taxpayers. So we have to provide a service to them. But when they would come in, it would really disrupt our normal operation of doing building inspections and our plan reviews, where we had to interact with these contractors and these residents. Now with the SAS, they're able to do all of that online, and we can answer their questions through emails that are shared with amongst the different departments that are involved. So that really helps cut down. We call it counter time. So when we cut down the counter time where people are coming into our station and asking questions at our counter, it helps us free up our staff to do our other duties. The second big area is our revenue. We saw a significant increase in our revenue collection. Whereas, and I always use this for an example, a plumber needs to secure a permit for a failed hot water heater at a house. Well, it fails on the weekend. So he's required to take a building permit to replace that hot water heater, but it happens on a Saturday. Town hall's closed. I'll skip the permit process. I'll just go ahead and install it for the homeowner, even though he knows he's supposed to get a permit. Now, with this sort of a system, he's able to go online, apply for his permit morning, noon, or night, 7 days a week, secure his permit, get all the approvals that if we're monitoring on the weekends, we can approve his permit. If we come in Monday morning, we approve it at that time. But where we would typically lose the revenue for a lot of work because of those after hours actions, now we're collecting that. So we're seeing our revenue collection coming up in the area of probably 15 to 20% within the first 2 years of implementing the system.
And overall, how has your experience been? Any surprises along the way? Any roadmaps for success that you have discerned from the experience?
Communications amongst the departments. The time that you put in the beginning is only going to help the rollout of the system in the end, where you can start cutting back. So early engagement of all the parties involved is very, very important. The second thing that's very critical when you finally do set a date to start your system is get the word out to all the contractors, all the community, that this is how the system is going to be implemented. And we used media, we used local government access TV, all of our websites were updated with the links for the new system. We really got the word out very early on that on such and such a date, this is how all permits were going to be processed in the town of Orange. We had very few surprises from that. There was some feedback from people, I don't have a computer, I don't have email. Those were very, very few and far between. And in the end, they were able to set up their email, they were able to get permits fine. And in the end, everyone that comes in and uses our system, I normally will ask them, what do you think of this system? And they all love it. They say it saves us a lot of time. We're not chasing you guys around to get signatures, and we're able to do a lot of this work after hours when we can sit down and have time to do it. So it's been a very, very good transition for us.
And that raises an interesting question about, sometimes this concept of a digital divide or implementing software solutions when, you're not quite sure about access to technology and things like that might be occurring. Is that an analysis that you had done, or did you know from just your existing community demographics that wasn't an impediment? Or have you had to develop any workarounds for people who do not have technology access that they might need?
We suspected it would be an issue very early on. So as part of our initial rollout, what we did in the office here at our fire station and up at the building department, we installed kiosks, basically workstations that are strictly used for the permit system. And people can come in, and if we have to, we can walk them through how the system works, how to set up their email, how to set themselves up as a user, and then show them how the system works. So we do have to spend a little bit of time initially with helping those few people set up at a kiosk. But once we do that, it's very easy for them to log back on, and they pick up on it very quickly.
All right. And what would you say the most important thing that our audience should walk away with today as they consider making these similar technology upgrades in their own communities?
It's don't fear the change, don't fear the technology. It's there to make your jobs easier. If you embrace it and you prepare yourselves for it, it's not anything that you should be, scared or caught off guard with. The other thing is, it's the way of the future. Here in Connecticut, we're a little behind the times sometimes with things as far as municipal government operations go because of tradition. But slowly we're changing that, and this is one way to change that. And once you get involved in it, once you make the commitment, you're going to realize yourselves, you're going to say, we should have done this years ago.
All right, so we have a great question in from Ryan, and he wants to know, other than building permits, what are some other popular products or forms that residents are using to engage with you using this technology?
Well, specifically in our office, we use it for anything from building department or building permit approvals. All of our commercial plan reviews are required to be, a permit is required to be submitted to our office for review before a building permit's even issued. That's all done online. We do liquor license renewals for restaurants and nightclubs, all done online. Healthcares, all of our educational occupancies have annual operating permits. Those are all done online. Residents are required to get open burning or bonfire permits from us. Those are all done online. We see the interest peaking in the Park and Recreation Department, where they're currently using their own dedicated system, but they're considering changing that and coming over to the Viewpoint system and bringing it all under the same umbrella. So there's a lot of different activities that are being done through the system itself.
It strikes me that so many of these services, elevate the town's operations to the level that citizens expect, from private business. I know just anecdotally that if I can do something online, if I can make a reservation or fill out a form online, I'm more apt to use that private vendor or company. Have you gotten any positive feedback or any feedback at all from your business or your service community about the fact that you are kind of rising to that level of customer service and expectation?
Yeah, in this day and age where taxes are going up, the expectation of services are going up with that, with the residents and the businesses. They want to see more services for the taxes that they're paying. And for what I would consider a very low cost, this is a major improvement in service for those people. So I think they see a big return on a very small investment in using SAS.
And as a reminder to our attendees, if you have questions for Tim, please use that attendee chat feature. You can ask your questions in that chat bar. I could ask questions about this all day, so I will continue to do that, but also give you a chance to type in your questions so you can get your specific questions or scenarios answered by the experiences from Orange, Connecticut. So my other question, going back to the idea of implementation, sometimes a barrier that I've heard thrown around relates to record keeping, especially in keeping public records and some of the state statutory requirements on the role of a city clerk or a recorder. It's always struck me that moving to a cloud-based system is actually more secure. But there are people that just desperately love to have, sheets and reams of paper and file folders. Did you encounter any sort of challenges related to record keeping, especially records that, must be maintained by state law? And how did you overcome or address those questions or challenges?
Yeah, traditionally with some departments, they liked having the paperwork. They really it's like online shopping. A lot of people don't like the online shop. They wanted to go to the store and pick up the box and look at it and feel it. A lot of our departments felt that they needed the hard copies of paperwork. And we did not discourage that in the beginning because we didn't want the change to come too suddenly by rolling this SAS out. So we let them continue with that. But what we did ask is when people submit for a permit, they also give, in addition to the paper copies they have to drop off, attach PDFs of drawings or permits or certificates to that permit. And then this way here we can start cutting down on our levels of paperwork and then sharing that information amongst the different departments. So what quickly took hold was when an applicant attached a set of building plans to one building permit, it was available to multiple departments with the click of a button in a PDF. So rather than have to hunt all that down or take up space in the offices, which is, real estate in our offices is very, very at a premium. We really started to cut down on that. And those departments that traditionally wanted the paperwork started to quickly back off saying, nope, this is good enough for us. The big question that came up, and we had to deal with state record retention agencies, is this acceptable? And after reviewing that and told them what we were doing, they said, yes, this is acceptable for safe record retention. We do still have on our local servers copies of the paperwork just in case. So any attachments are still saved in what we call street files. Typically when you go into a town hall, there's rows and rows of file cabinets with everyone's street address. And when you try and open up those drawers and shoehorn out a file folder for an address, all the paperwork is hidden in there. Now what's happening is we're transitioning over to where we're telling people we only want electronic submittals. So we set up an electronic filing cabinet or electronic occupancy file for the addresses. So we're starting to transition over where we set up 123 Main Street. All the attachments are being saved into 123 Main Street, and it's shared amongst all the departments that have the permissions to see it. So it's starting to cut down on that paperwork, and we still have good record retention capabilities.
And another great question. Talk to us about cybersecurity. Again, a lot of people try to throw up roadblocks. How did you address questions or concerns about cybersecurity and keeping information safe?
Really, that buy-in was from our IT department. Once we showed them the system, they asked their technical questions of the technical people at Viewpoint. They felt comfortable that the system was secure. They were very happy with the backups were being done, the redundancy of the backups. They were very happy with the support and the updates and the troubleshooting on their end as a host. Once the buy-in was there from the IT department, it was easy for us to make the commitment. The way we set it up was we were very restricted on permissions in the system, the database itself, who has the ability to view, change, or access anything. Plus, every time there's an action on any permit, there's a record stamp of who did what, at what time, on what date, and what was done as far as an action to that one record. So there's accountability within the departments to see if any changes were actually made to that record and who did it.
And something that I hear often, and I think it comes from a place of pride, and so I'm not making fun of it, but every local government thinks that they are the special snowflake, and they have needs and expectations that are far different than any other local government out there. But what we know is that generally the challenges that all of our organizations are facing are more similar than they are different. But the need for customization is a huge aspect of any software solution. Share with us how you were able to customize your service delivery so it met your needs versus just feeling like you were stuck with like the off, what you bought off the shelf, and that's what you had to deal with.
That's a good point. I mean, initially, one of my concerns is I did not want to get involved with a vendor who would make changes to a template or a document. A lot of companies will make any changes you want to the tune of $250 an hour in developing that. With Viewpoint, they showed us how to make the changes ourselves, and we're able to create these forms based on their templates that the system came with in the very beginning. So we make the changes, we add, the information, delete the information, add icons, signature lines, approval boxes the way we want to do it. Once we learned how to do it, it was very simple. So now we don't have to rely on, additional costs in addition to along with our annual contract for those development charges. Some of the systems we did look at, they have great looking forms, but you have to pay for them to set them up. And that was a concern. I did not want to get involved in that because I felt that there was very excessive costs associated. Some bigger cities it may be so large scale, it may be worth their while to have the company set those up. But again, like I said before, when we initially went through the piles of forms that every department used, it was our chance to really whittle that down to the basic information that we needed, get rid of old redundant information that wasn't needed, and develop the forms from scratch from there. And we did it all in-house.
And what you describe is something that I'm seeing quite a bit happen in our member cities, and often starting at the exact same point, which is looking at forms and working with staff and with community members on, how can just the form itself be better, and then taking that next step to determining what can go online and what can't. When it came to kind of process improvement or process innovation steps, can you describe a little bit more of what you and your staff went through leading up to the decision to move to these online technologies?
Well, I mean, we really had to take a hard look at ourselves and our operations, every one of them. So we had to start within our own departments to see how is the flow of information happening amongst our staff within our department, and then how are we sharing the information with the departments that need to be involved in various processes. So it really, we had to, do a lot of soul searching and look at ourselves pretty hard as to where our traditional operation was. In my case, fortunately, I mean, our operation, when I started in 89, 88, was very basic. We had very few forms, very little involvement. But quickly I realized that we need to be more involved in this process. So from day one, I really started to get involved more with permits and applications and the review process, and then ultimately, certificates of compliance or approval at the end of a project. So we really had to look within ourselves first and say, all right, this is where we're weak, this is where we need to make changes, this is where I'd like to make changes. So we really had to examine ourselves first and admit to ourselves that, yep, this isn't working, we need to start from scratch in certain areas. That was probably the biggest challenge. And then once we convinced the other departments to do the very same thing, it wasn't so bad, because nobody wants to admit that their operation has fault or flaws, because that's the way it's been done for years. It seems to work. Once you get past that barrier and say, yes, we can provide these services much better, and we had the prodding and the encouragement of the first selectman to say, make this happen. It really helped our process move along.
Talk to us about writing a SaaS-friendly RFP. You described very eloquently this idea that sometimes we don't like to push or promote change because we're doing things the way that they've always been done. Writing an RFP that embraces a very new technology is very difficult for some local governments. How did you approach your RFP process? How did you educate yourself and then translate that into the document that you shared for vendors to respond to?
Well, I work closely with our municipal government agencies, in the region, asked for their input. And then I just looked at all the questions. I wrote down all the questions that I would have, or all the challenges that I would see with implementing this sort of a system, and tried to address them and turn those into, instead of questions, turned them into requirements for the RFP and drafted it that way. And in very short order, the RFP came together very quickly that we wanted that cloud-based system. We wanted the ability to edit our own documents ourselves without additional outside costs. The redundancy, the backups, and the support really fell together quickly once we realized what we wanted the system to do for us. So the RFPs, yes, they can be a challenge. I mean, if you want to do an RFP for a fire engine or a ladder truck, have at it. It's a very difficult process. Doing an RFP for a system like this isn't very difficult. It comes together quickly, and you solicit and you reach out to your networks that we all have available and ask the questions, and it'll come together fast.
All right, and here's another great audience question. Since you've been live and working in this system for a while, if you took a step back and reflected on everything, the process from start to finish, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I probably would have tried to get the buy-in of some of those, the 60% departments that weren't too sure of it. I would try to have gotten the buy-in a little bit sooner by going to those department heads, really pushing them, getting them involved early on. When I told you we did a lot of that groundwork and research and development within my office here, I would like to have had the other agencies involved, the other departments involved in that process. So we were all learning at the same time. Taking away that step of becoming the teacher for the new software really would have been a benefit to us. But our belief in the system and our commitment to the system helped us get through that. So yeah, we had to push a lot of birds out of the nest so they'd fly, but now they're flying and they're happy with it. I just wish we got them involved a little bit sooner in the process, and we probably could have rolled that out maybe 6 months sooner than we did.
All right, so my last question for you, is there anything that we should have asked you, or is there anything else that you want to share as our audience reflects on making this similar technology change in their organizations?
No, not really. I mean, all of our jobs, especially municipal government, the requirements are ever mounting. It's becoming a more difficult process being in this sort of a service-oriented business, especially when it's supported by tax dollars. And again, people are expecting more for their tax dollars. And this is one way to really get a lot of good public relations going and have your residents and your businesses and your contractors see the town hall as an ally, not a challenge. So by implementing this and getting them on board early, they really see that you're looking to work with them and streamline the operation. Solicit those people and ask them for their feedback once they do participate, and you'd be very surprised at how many negatives you're not going to get. It's really been all positives for us.
All right, so we have come to the end of today's webinar, and I want to thank Viewpoint Cloud for sponsoring this webinar and to Tim for his excellent insight into these questions and for making SaaS seem less scary. Thank you everyone for participating and sharing your time with ELGL. And as a reminder, we have recorded this webinar and it will be available later today on elgl.org. You can also reference the hashtag ELGLJam on Twitter, although I will admit that I will be populating that hashtag after this call because there were so many great nuggets of wisdom that I couldn't type and tweet fast enough. But I welcome you to also share your thoughts and discussions in that Twitter chain from our discussion today. Please stay in touch with Tim online, and we'll also include his contact information on the recording and blog post from this webinar. And with that, again, thank you for joining us. I'll end today's webinar, and thanks for your support of ELGL.
Thank you, everyone.